Hey there, and welcome to another video from Grove Studio. This is going to be another quick one. We're going to be talking about Radial filter in Lightroom. And this is a tool that admittedly, I don't really use it a whole lot. And I think generally for interiors, you just don't have a lot of need for it. But if you know me and you know the Grove Studio at all, you know that we are about giving you tools so that you have all the options in your back pocket in case the situation arises and you need it. So, in the spirit of giving you all the tools that I can, let's go over what the radial filter does, how it works, and how you might incorporate it. So here we have this photo and I've made adjustments to it. I'm pretty happy with it, but there are some things that I want to change a little bit. So let's say, for example, I want to brighten up some of the shadows in this bottom left corner. And I could very well use the gradient filter, which we've discussed in another video, and that is one of my absolute favorite brush tools to use in Lightroom. But we're going to try using the radial filter today and see how that works. The radial filter can be found up here at the very top next to some of the other tools like the local adjustment brush. You have your gradient filter here, you have your spot removal, red eye, this is for cropping, and right here the circle with the dot in the middle is your radial filter. You can also access it by pressing Shift M and it'll open up this panel of sliders for you. So when you open it up, it's going to give you the sliders in the last position that any of the brushes had the sliders in. So if you are applying a local adjustment brush, it's going to open up the radial filter and put the sliders in those same positions. It's just going to carry over whatever the slider settings were from the last time you did any of them. Let's adjust the sliders and get them where we want them to be for that corner. So if we want to brighten the shadows a bit, we're going to obviously adjust the shadow slider. We're going to probably leave the highlights as is. And let's say we're going to maybe up the exposure just a little bit. I don't really want to mess with the temperature or the tint, so let's leave that. And maybe we lighten up the blacks just a little bit. We're going to not touch the dehaze and maybe not touch the clarity. So let's just do that. We've upped the exposure, we've upped the shadows, and we've lightened the blacks. Now, when you hover over the photo, you're going to see this cross. And what you're going to do, it's similar to when you apply the gradient filter. You're going to click and drag. And what you want to make sure of with this one is that you're not clicking and dragging and then instantly letting go. You want to actually click, drag, and then make sure that you adjust it before you pick up your mouse or your finger from the trackpad or whatever you're using, and adjust it before you let go of that click. So let's say, for example, I'm going to do a large oval like this. I'm going to let go and I'm going to click down here so we can see where the effect was applied. And we see that it was applied to everywhere but inside the circle or the oval. That is because down here we have a slider for the feathering and for inverting. The feathering, obviously, if you go to 0, it's going to be a very harsh edge. You're really never going to need to use this. You're always going to want to be much more strongly feathered. If you go all the way up, you're basically having an extremely soft edge. You're going to lean more towards this because you don't want the effect to be very in your face or obvious. So typically you're going to fall somewhere in the, I typically fall somewhere in like the 50s to maybe like 60s or 70s, somewhere in there, but it'll be case by case depending on where you're applying it. Then if we check the box next to the word invert, it's going to do just that. It's going to invert it so that rather than applying the effect to everywhere but inside the round shape, it's actually applying it to inside. And that epicenter of that shape becomes the strongest effect, and it's going to feather out to nothing as it goes to that edge. So now that we've got it inverted, we need to move it, and we can click and drag from that center node, and then we need to rotate, which you can do by hovering outside any of these little white squares. So we're going to rotate that, and you can also pull from any of those white squares to adjust it. And oh, actually you can drag it around by clicking and dragging from anywhere inside. So that's fantastic. Okay, so let me turn this off. So now we can see it's brightened it up quite a bit. And if you want to make some adjustments in real time to the current radial filter that you have, make sure that it is selected by making sure you're clicked into that center node, and then you can make your adjustments. So if I wanted to make this even brighter, I could do that. And then when you're done, you can click New. And you can see that the center node for this one has gone to all gray. The outer limit of it is not visible anymore, and you're back to having that little cross. So now if I go to put another radial filter in there, it's going to revert back to the original slider settings from when I first applied the last radial filter. So what I recommend doing is before you click and do another one, let's backtrack. I've clicked into New, and before clicking on the photo, I'm going to adjust my sliders. So I know I want it brighter, and I know I want the shadows brightened even more. So now, and I know I want to invert it, and I'm going to put, I think I was in the 50s, so I'm going to put it there. Now I know that I'm going to get more of the effect that I want, and I can click and drag and apply that to wherever. There are a few things to keep in mind with this tool. One is, because you have this round edge to it, even if you have the feathering done very softly, it's not going to apply to a lot of situations for interiors. So this is one where it's going to be a very selective, very particular situations where it'll actually come in handy. And the other thing to keep in mind is one situation where you don't want to really use it is in windows, because if let me adjust this one. Say I want to darken this view out the window because it's a little too bright. What's going to happen is you're not going to get a clean edge on that at all. So you're either going to end up getting a little bit of the effect on the window frame, which we don't want, or you're going to get some of the light edges around the view. So it's going to be, you're either not going to get the entire view, or it's going to overlap and make some of the window frame dark. So not a good situation for that. So trust me, I've tried, not a good tool for this one. One more thing I want to show you with this is if you have, for example, let's stick with this one. So let's say we've darkened this up, and you want to add to this round shape. You can actually add onto it by going to the word brush here in the top right. And it's going to keep the same settings that you have in your current selected radial filter. And you can see that when you do that, the actual brush from like the local adjustment tool pops up, and you can adjust it in size. You can adjust the size, the feathering, the flow, all of that. We're going to uncheck the auto mask, and you can essentially add on to that round shape. Now, this might make it tempting to use for windows, but granted, I'm doing this very quickly, but it's still extremely difficult to get a clean edge. So again, I don't recommend using even this combination for window views. That really is something that you want to figure out with your blending of layers and maybe in Photoshop, because it has much more precise selection tools. But this is a great tool to know about because you're not limited to that round shape from the radial filter, you can actually add onto it and extend it freehand. So if I click down here to show the coverage area, I've gone beyond that radial filter. Now, one side note that I want to make on this is there aren't too many situations where there aren't really any that I can remember where I've felt the need to use the radial filter and then add the brush. Because chances are that if this is a situation where you're going to have your radial filter and then you need to add onto it somehow, even if it's not right on the edges of the round shape, chances are you're just going to go use your local adjustment brush. You're going to use this one up here, which we've also talked about in a different video. I don't really know that there's going to be a situation ever, or I'd say very rarely, where you're doing interior photos and you feel like you need the radial filter and then an additional brush onto it. So this is one of those probably not going to need it, but really good to know about kind of tools. And then if you want to go back to editing the actual radial part of it, you can do that. And you can do that like that. So when you make adjustments to the radial filter, it's going to make adjustments also to the brush portion of it. So whatever you added on as a brush, it's kind of linked to the radial filter, the round area that you first selected. When you are done, you can click back into this icon. You can hit Shift M, or you can click Done here at the very bottom. So that's it. That is the radial filter tool. I hope this has been helpful. This is, again, not a tool that I imagine you're going to really need very often at all, especially for interiors. But like I said, I'm a fan of making sure that you have as many tools at your disposal as possible so that if the situation arises, you know what kind of tool to use for what situation. I hope this video has been really helpful. And if you like the video, please click like. If you like the channel, please hit subscribe. Thank you so much for sticking around, and I will see you next time.